Have you ever noticed how sometimes the most powerful prayers don't come from the rich, the mighty, or the educated, but from those who have nothing left except hope? Sometimes a single whisper from a heart that's broken carries more weight than 100 loud sermons. And this is a story about one such prayer. It is the story of a poor woman whose life was filled with hardship, whose nights were longer than anyone could bear, and whose days were spent in silence and pain. But one prayer, just one, shook the heart of a man who had everything money could buy, yet nothing that money could not. This story begins in a small American town, tucked somewhere in the Midwest, where winters are harsh and unforgiving, and summers often come with long droughts. In that little town lived a woman named Mary. She was a widow in her late 50s, her hair already streaked with gray, her hands rough from years of working jobs most people would not even want to think about. Mary lived in a tiny wooden house that creaked when the wind blew, a house that looked as though one strong storm could tear it apart. Her husband had died years ago in a factory accident, leaving her alone with two children, James and Anna. James, the older one, had gone to the city to look for work, but hadn't been able to send much money back. Anna, her daughter, was still in school, just 16, full of dreams she didn't know how to reach. Life for Mary was not just difficult, was a constant battle. She worked at the local diner, cleaning tables and washing dishes, sometimes standing on her tired feet for 10 hours straight, earning just enough to pay rent, keep the lights on, and put food on the table, though some nights food was little more than bread and soup. And yet, despite all of this, Mary was known for one thing: her unwavering faith. Every morning before leaving for work, she would whisper a prayer. Not a loud one, not one meant to impress anyone else. Just a quiet, trembling prayer. Lord, give me strength today. Not for myself, but for my children. But as months turned into years, even Mary's faith began to feel heavy. Bills piled up. Her daughter needed books for school. Her son was struggling in the city, and winter was coming, the kind of winter that chills the bones of the poor. Her house had cracks that let in the cold wind, and her old coat was no match for the snow. One night, as she sat at her kitchen table with nothing but a single candle burning, Mary whispered a prayer that was different from all the rest. With tears running down her face, she said, "Lord, I have nothing left. My hands are empty. My heart is weary. I don't ask for riches. I don't ask for comfort. I just ask, please, don't let my children lose hope. If they see me break, they will break too. Please, give me just enough to keep them believing tomorrow will be better than today." She didn't know it, but that prayer was about to travel further than she could imagine. Because on the other side of town, there lived a man named Richard Hayes. He was the wealthiest man in the county, owner of factories, businesses, and vast lands. His mansion sat on a hill overlooking the town, with lights that never seemed to go out and gates that made it clear no one from Arya's world belonged anywhere near his. People spoke of him with awe, some with envy, and many with resentment. Richard had everything, at least that's what people thought: money, power, influence. But what no one knew was that he lived in a silence far louder than Mary's. His wife had passed away years earlier, and he had no children. The halls of his grand house echoed with emptiness. He bought things to fill the silence cars, paintings, rare wines, but the silence remained. And while he had climbed every mountain of success, he had no one to share the view with. One night, restless and unable to sleep, Richard took his car and drove through town. The streets were quiet, the shops closed, the diner lights off. As he passed through the poorer part of town, his eyes caught something through a cracked window in a small wooden house. He saw a woman sitting by candlelight. Her hands clasped tightly together, her head bowed. He slowed the car. He couldn't hear her words, but he could feel something in that image. It wasn't the desperation of someone begging for money. It wasn't the anger of someone cursing their fate. It was pure. a prayer spoken from a place he couldn't understand. He, the richest man in town, who had everything, realized he had never once prayed like that. For reasons he couldn't explain, Richard drove home that night unsettled. He tried to push the image away, but it stayed with him, Mary, sitting alone, whispering into the silence. The next morning, Richard did something unusual. He asked one of his employees who lived near that side of town if he knew the woman in the small wooden house. "That's Mary," the man said. "She works at the diner. Hard-working woman, but life's been rough on her. Lost her husband in an accident, got 2 kids. She barely makes it through the month, but she never complains. Always has a smile for everyone at the diner, even when she looks like she hasn't slept." Richard didn't respond. He just nodded and dismissed the man. But that evening, he drove again to that street. Again, he saw the same flicker of candlelight through the window. And again, he felt something stir inside him. For days, this continued. He would find himself driving past that little house, wondering why it mattered to him. And then, one particularly cold night, when snow blanketed the streets and his heated car felt like a cocoon, he saw Mary walking home from the diner. She was wearing a coat so thin it seemed useless against the snow. In her hand, she carried a paper bag with what must have been food. She was walking slowly, tired, her breath visible in the freezing air. Something inside Richard snapped. He parked the car, stepped out, and walked toward her. Mary, startled, looked up at the tall man approaching her. She didn't recognize him at first. Why would she? She had never been anywhere near his world. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Richard asked awkwardly. Mary gave a faint smile. "I'm fine." Heading home. Richard hesitated. For a man used to making million-dollar decisions, words had never felt so heavy. Finally, he said, "I saw you the other night. In your home, praying." Mary's eyes widened slightly, embarrassed. "Oh," she whispered. "I didn't know anyone could see." Richard nodded slowly. "I don't know what you prayed for, but I haven't been able to forget it." Mary lowered her eyes. "I only prayed for my children. That's all I ever pray for." And in that moment, something happened that Richard couldn't explain. The richest man in town, whose heart had been locked behind walls of stone, felt those walls crack. He didn't hear just words, he heard truth. The next day, Richard called his lawyers, his managers, and quietly began making arrangements. He didn't announce anything to the town. He didn't make speeches or seek attention. Instead, he began to send anonymous gifts to Mary's home groceries, warm clothes for Anna, envelopes with money to cover school fees, even repairs to the old wooden house. At first, Mary was confused. She thought it was some mistake. But when the gifts kept coming, she fell to her knees and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. I asked for hope, and you sent it." Weeks passed, then months. Mary's life, though still simple, grew lighter. She no longer had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying food. Anna could continue school without worrying about books. James returned from the city after finding steady work, relieved to see his mother less burdened. And all the while, Richard watched from a distance, never revealing himself. It wasn't until one day, when Mary walked into the diner to find the entire place renovated. New equipment, higher wages for the staff, that she realized the blessings were bigger than she imagined. The diner owner told her a wealthy investor wanted to help. Said it was time someone cared about the people who cared for everyone else. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't know why someone would care about her life, her struggles, her prayers. But she knew one thing. Her prayer had been heard. One evening, months later, Richard finally gathered the courage to speak to her again. He found her walking home, just as before, but this time with a stronger step, her daughter beside her, laughing. "Mary," he called softly. She turned, surprised to see him again. "I just wanted to tell you," Richard said, his voice unsteady, "your prayer. It changed me. I thought I had everything. But seeing you, I realized I had nothing that mattered. Thank you for reminding me what wealth really is. Mary smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I only prayed for hope. I never knew it would touch anyone else. Richard shook his head. It touched me more than you'll ever know. And in that quiet, snowy street, the richest man and the poorest woman stood together, both realizing that sometimes the smallest prayer can shake the largest heart, because wealth is not measured in money, but in compassion. And hope, when shared, multiplies. So, my friend, if you are listening right now, remember this. Never think your prayer, your hope, your small act of faith is too weak to matter. Sometimes it is the quietest cry that reaches the farthest. Sometimes what you whisper in your darkest night can light up someone else's world. A poor woman's prayer can indeed shake the richest heart. And your voice, no matter how small it feels, can change someone's life in ways you may never see.